Okay, so we're going to pick up with the next phyla in the plant kingdom. So you should have your notes out and a pen or pencil and highlighters ready to go. So the next three phyla are going to be vascular plants. When we looked at this, the first time we separated them out, we separated them in either vascular or non-vascular or vascular. So they're this or this. And so all of the plants went into the vascular category except for the ones that went here, and these were our bryophytes or our mosses. So now it's time to focus on this big category that has all the other plants in it. And now we have to go to two different things. It's either going to be this or not this. And so they're either going to have seeds or no seeds. Remember, all of these are vascular. So we're going to take a look at the no seed vascular plants. And so if they fit into this category, it ends here because the no seed vascular plants are one group of plants, and those are the Teridophytes. Okay? So what are Pteridophytes? Well, remember that we said that they had a vascular system. So let's look at what vascular means before we go into the other characteristics of the Pteridophytes. All of the plants except for the mosses are going to be vascular. And I told you we were going to make a comparison kind of to the human body with this. And so in your body, don't look at the screen right now, just listen to my voice. In your body, you have two kinds of tubes. You have arteries and you have veins. Arteries are going to take the blood away from your heart, and the veins are going to bring the blood back to your heart. It is the same idea with plants. They have two kinds of tubes also. They're just going to be responsible for carrying two different things. So the first kind is called xylem. Xylem, and it's with an X. Xylem tissue is going to carry water and minerals up. Xylem goes up. So they're going to go up from the roots. So they're going to gather the water out of the ground, the minerals out of the ground into the roots, and carry them up through the plant. The other kind is going to be phloem. Phloem, and phloem flows downward. So where you had photosynthesis taking place in the leaves, the plant is then going to take the stuff, put them in its phloem tubes or tissues, and carry them down. And this is going to be the sugars that were made in photosynthesis. And so as the plant feeds on it, there's going to be leftovers. And where our body stores leftovers as fat out and around in our body, in our adipose cells, the plants are going to take the leftover sugars and store them downward in the roots. The roots are a nice, great place to store things. Okay? So you say, well, how does this stuff move around? We have blood, and our blood carries our oxygen. Well, plants have what we call sap. Sap is this fluid that's really kind of like plant blood. And it goes inside the xylem or the phloem, carrying these things either upwards or downwards. So take this minute to pause the video and go ahead and add all of this that's on the screen. Everything that's on the screen that we just talked about is going to be extremely important. Do that right now, please. All right, so let's look a little more at this vascular system, okay? The vascular system is going to do several things for the plant. It's going to allow the plant to grow tall because of these tubes, and these tubes are strong. These are going to be in the stalks or the stems. And so it'll be transporting things, but it also adds strength. So plants that have vascular tissue or stems can grow much taller. I mean, you think about a sunflower, their stalks can be 6 and 7 feet tall, just like a person, or taller than a person. So that vascular system is pretty sturdy. If you look over to the right-hand side of your screen here, we have what we call a cross section. And this is what it would look like if I had taken a stem and cut it in half, and we're looking at one side of it. And so you can see the xylem tubes are right here and right here. Notice the arrows are showing you this is going to flow up to the leaves and up to the rest of the plant. And these tubes on the right-hand side are going to be your phloem tubes, and those are going to flow downwards and towards the roots. Now you say, well, wait a second, Miss Burton, what is this stuff that's in the center? You didn't tell us about cambium. Cambium is going to be the old xylem, and once it's no longer in use, it's at the center and it stays there and just provides support. And then the plant, as it grows or as it ages, it will add more tubes outward on the outside. And so when these xylem no longer work again, if it gets to that age of a plant, then they would become cambium and new tubes would grow. So you have two types of vascular system in plants. You have phloem and you have xylem. Make sure that you know the difference between these two things, and remember that you need to know the fact that the vascular system allows transport and it also allows strength, which allows the plant to grow much taller. Pause the video right now and go ahead and write these facts down, and if you're so inclined, go ahead and draw this cross section. It'd be a great visual to have in your notes. All right, I really love this view of a celery stalk. You say, celery, that's a vegetable, you eat that. Well, we say vegetable, it's not really a vegetable. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But what we have, if you look at the end of celery, is that you see these little tubes there. You see these little round things. Well, guess what that is? That's exactly xylem and phloem. Celery is literally a stalk. It's the stalk or the stem of the plant. And so this is what's responsible for carrying the water and the nutrients up the stalk and into the celery leaves at the top. And then those celery leaves will conduct photosynthesis, and then the phloem will carry the sugars down into the roots for it to be stored. All right, so we just talked about basically the vascular system. And so what we're looking at here are the Teridophyta. And so if we drew a line on our taxonomy, these are all of the vascular plants on this side, and this one group here is the non-vascular. So we said that the Teridophyta are the ones that are vascular, but how are we going to separate them off from these two? Well, these guys are the no-seeds. The no-seeds, and these are your ferns. Seedless vascular plants, or no seeds, but they have vascular tissue, are your different types of ferns and horsetails. Club moss is a type of fern or horsetail as well. Don't let the name fool you. We see ferns all the time in our forest. They grow wild up here, which is really cool. They love to live in shaded areas. Ferns will scorch and burn in the sun, so that's why in our forest we have tons of them. But if you ever see the ones on the side of the road, as soon as summer really starts to hit, they turn brown and crispy and they die back. They just don't do well in a full sun environment. They do not reproduce with seeds. And so we're going to talk in a few minutes on how they reproduce without seeds. But if you look at this visual right here, this diagram, these long things that we would often call ferns or leaves are actually called fronds. Fronds. And these fronds have little blades on them, okay? And they are leaves, but it is one long leaf, but it has really just a different name when it's a fern with the frond. And then you have these blades that go all the way up on a frond, and these can look very different. I'm going to show you some pictures in just a minute on how different these blades can actually look from fern to fern. Then you have down here at the bottom, you have what's called a fiddlehead. A fiddlehead is really a baby frond or fern. Now, you have these rhizomes down here at the bottom, and then you have these hairy looking roots at the bottom. So here's the diagram that's larger, and I'd love for you to go ahead and pause the video and draw this diagram and label it. You really just have 5 little things that you have to label, and it doesn't have to be a Picasso drawing, or it doesn't have to be, you know, like worthy of the Louvre, but try to get this down in your notes so that you understand the different parts of a fern plant. All right, so if they don't reproduce with seeds, then how do they reproduce? Okay, they reproduce with what we call spores. And so if you've ever seen the underside of a frond, let's use the right terminology. If you've ever seen the underside of a frond and looked at each individual blade, sometimes you will see these little black, we think they look like seeds or little beads, but those are actually spores. And here's some that are up close right here on these blades. Okay, so what happens is they develop these little sporangium, and these spores will then disperse. Okay, and then they have these little eggs inside of them. The eggs will then land down at the base of the fern. And so these little spores will then form these fiddleheads. And as the fiddleheads then grow and they sink in, they then become these fronds. You don't have to know the whole life cycle of a fern in order to move on. This is not something I'm going to test you on, but I think you'll see the difference between spore reproduction and seed reproduction in just a little bit. All right, remember I told you I was going to tell you the difference or show you some differences in blades that are on fronds. So you can have the fronds like we saw before, where it was just this long, looked like stick that had a leaf straight out. Okay, that was like this. Well, if you look at this one right here, this one has a long stick looking thing down the center, but then it has like individual sticks with little blades that come out. Here's another picture of one that looks like that, but then you can have the maidenhair fern, which doesn't have the straight blades. It has these little round things, and I'm sorry about my pen doing crazy things right there. You can have these other ferns over here that really don't even have a blade. They just have these sticky looking things. So ferns can look really different, and there's a huge variety of ferns. I think it's interesting to look at these little fiddleheads up here at the top and look at the formation of their blades right there. All right, so the next two phyla are going to be seeded and vascular, which you already know that. We've already divided them out. We said, okay, if we're looking at this up here, we said vascular or non-vascular. And so now we're going through the vascular. And then we took all those plants and we said, okay, no seeds or seeds. So now we're going to look down at the seed plants. And we're going to take these guys and divide them into two categories. Remember, dichotomous means two choices every time. And so our dichotomous key takes these seeds and puts them into two choices. Are they going to be naked or are they going to be covered? Naked or covered. And I guess you could say covered or not covered, because naked is really not covered. Okay, because I remember I told you on your dichotomous keys it's going to be this or not this. So covered or not covered, which would be naked. Let's go ahead and talk about, before we do that, how these guys reproduce, because they're all going to reproduce with seeds. And so this brings up the whole sexual reproduction with pollen and seeds. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, wait a second, we already talked about sexual reproduction before, and I'm not thinking about plants. That's really not what our focus was. But plants undergo sexual reproduction. Remember, I told you that the actual scientific definition of sexual reproduction means that you've got a male cell and a female cell. Remember, I told you it had nothing to do with kissy face, let's go on a date. It's really talking about the types of cells that are involved. And so it's a male cell and a female cell that are going to combine to make offspring. Pollen are going to be tiny structures or tiny cells that contain tiny structures that contain the cells that later become sperm. All right, so plant sperm is pollen. So the pollen is going to be our male cells, okay, our male reproduction cells, whereas seeds are going to be the eggs, like the female eggs. They're structures that contain a young plant inside. They're covered by a protective covering, make sure that you pause the video right here and you get these two definitions down, and then I'm going to take you further into this and show you how this really works. All right, let's look at the gymnosperms. Okay, gymnosperms are the naked seeds, and I know you're like, well, naked, what do you mean? It basically means their seeds are out in the open. They're in cones. Not as exciting as you were expecting, right? Cones, like pine cones. Pine cones have the seeds right out there, right in the open. They're naked because they're not enclosed by a fruit or a flower. That's what naked seed means. So these are going to be all of the plants that reproduce with seeds that do not have fruits or flowers. So what does that leave? Well, that leaves our conifers. Conifer is a cone bearer, and you can see these pine cones up here. You've got some of these other little like the acorns right there and other things. All of your evergreens are going to be your gymnosperms. Pretty much any green plant that reproduces with seeds that doesn't have flowers or fruit. These are going to be a lot of our forest trees. All right, we're going to stop right here for today, and I'm going to give you this homework assignment. And if you're so inclined, I know my computer won't let me play this YouTube video when I'm recording my lesson, but type this in and watch this video. This homework will be coming to you, and it will be due tomorrow.